Emily Carter had spent over 2 decades crafting the soul of NeuroEdge, a biotech powerhouse nestled in the heart of San Diego. She wasn't just an employee, she was the original architect, back when NeuroEdge was just 12 idealists sharing a cramped room above a Thai restaurant. It was Emily who envisioned a predictive neural interface system that would later revolutionize adaptive medicine. She wrote the first algorithm, debugged in the dark, and stayed when others quit. Never the spotlight seeker, Emily was the one in the lab coat while others pitched to VCs in sleek suits. She coded through Christmas, solved anomalies during New Year's, and never once asked for recognition. Quiet brilliance, that's what they used to call it. But brilliance alone doesn't survive corporate politics. Then came Julian Marks, younger, polished, with an MBA and a grin that knew how to win rooms. Within months of him becoming CEO, Emily noticed the shift. Meetings she once led were now held without her. She was called a legacy contributor, a title that tasted like rust. But Emily wasn't naive. She stayed, not for loyalty, but for the last piece of code only she could deliver. And she knew her time was coming. It happened on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday where the rain barely touches the ground before evaporating in the California sun and the silence in the office feels off, like the walls are holding their breath. Emily Carter's coffee had gone cold before her first sip. She should have known something was wrong when the 9 a.m. leadership sync was suddenly postponed due to executive travel. She'd heard that excuse before. But today, it felt different. She looked at her calendar. A meeting had been added. Quietly, 5 p.m., room 14B. Subject line, strategic transition planning. No agenda, no details. Her breath caught. Emily had built NeuroEdge's cornerstone platform, a self-correcting neural interface that allowed real-time analysis of degenerative diseases. Her work had paved the way for multi-billion-dollar clinical applications. But she wasn't the one they sent to the stage at product launches. That was Julian Marks, the new CEO. Smooth, strategic, hungry. He knew how to play the game. Emily? She was the engine under the hood. Quiet, powerful, often ignored. The meeting invite wasn't just a meeting. It was a signal. At 4:59 p.m., Emily walked into the glass conference room. Her steps steady, her heart pounding like war drums. Julian was already there, perfectly composed in his tailored suit. To his right sat Angela Reed from Our. Her laptop open, a soft expression frozen on her face. Between them, a pink folder. Angela offered a polite nod. Julian gave his signature grin, the one that never reached his eyes. Emily, he said, first, thank you for everything you've done. Emily didn't sit. Julian continued, calm, calculated. As we position NeuroEdge for its next chapter, we're streamlining our leadership structure, agile, forward-thinking, dynamic. The words floated in the air like poison in a perfume bottle. Angela slid the folder forward. This outlines your severance package. 3 months' salary, extended healthcare, and a generous outplacement service. Emily didn't touch it. I see, she said, her voice even. Julian leaned back. It's not personal. No, Emily replied, finally meeting his gaze. It's predictable. She turned without another word, leaving the folder unopened on the table. Behind her, the office had grown eerily still. Colleagues avoided eye contact. One whispered as she passed, they really did it. Another, pale with shock, simply mouthed, I'm sorry. At the elevator, she paused. A new poster hung beside the doors, one of Julian's rebranding initiatives. Bold letters across a sleek blue background. The future belongs to the fearless. Emily scoffed. Then they have no idea what fearless looks like. She didn't go home, not yet. Instead, she returned to her office, shut the door, and pulled out her personal laptop. Hidden beneath layers of encryption sat Athena Core Phase 2, a file structure no one at NeuroEdge knew existed. It held something they hadn't paid attention to, the real algorithm. Her version, complete, clean, optimized, and not created on company time or hardware. Every major development she'd made in the past 2 years? Documented, timestamped, and stored under her name. Legally hers. They thought they had extracted every last drop of her value. That she'd pass over her mind's greatest work like a disgruntled employee desperate for one last paycheck. But Emily Carter didn't build systems to be forgotten. The next morning, NeuroEdge's systems began to glitch, subtly, but enough to raise questions. Several back-end files went missing, Links to AthenaCore's routing system began throwing error messages. Engineers scrambled. Julian remained calm. He told investors the hiccup was temporary. But it wasn't, because what Emily had handed over during knowledge transfer was real, but hollow. The shell of a system. The blueprint with the key pieces intentionally absent. Julian's golden product, the crown jewel they were about to license to 4 major hospitals, couldn't run. And Emily? She was already sipping coffee across town at a quiet rooftop cafe. Sitting across from Rachel Kim, CTO of Bionova Therapeutics, NeuroEdge's fiercest competitor. I heard what happened, Rachel said, her tone neutral but curious. And I also heard you might have something they no longer own. Emily smiled and slid a tablet across the table. On it was her version of the AthenaCore engine, faster, cleaner, more adaptive than anything on the market. Rachel's eyes widened as the simulation played. You built this? Every line, Emily replied. There was a beat of silence before Rachel said, how soon can you start? That evening, Emily powered down her laptop and looked out over the skyline. She didn't feel rage or vindication. She felt ready. The betrayal wasn't the end of her story. It was the ignition. Julian had removed her from the building. But what he couldn't see was that he had just triggered the release of something far more dangerous than anger and tension. She wasn't just going to recover. She was going to lead. And tomorrow, the industry would find out. They didn't fire a developer. They fired the inventor. It was Sunday night, and Emily Carter was already 3 days removed from the company that had once been her world. But instead of grief, her heart held a quiet storm, the kind that brews after betrayal. But before retaliation, her phone lit up. Rachel Kim, Emily, the CTO of Bionova began. Her voice confident. The board has reviewed your framework. We're ready to move forward. I've sent over a preliminary agreement. But we want more than your algorithm, we want you. Emily didn't hesitate. Then you have me. But there's one condition. Let me guess, Rachel said with a smile in her tone. Full credit, full attribution, and press. Emily added, the world needs to know exactly who built AthenaCore. Done. That night, while Julian Marks was still bragging on LinkedIn about NeuroEdge's lean transition, Emily was being announced as the chief AI strategist at Bionova, along with the formal acquisition of the AthenaCore 2.0 engine. But the real fireworks hadn't even started yet. Monday 9 a.m. Emily clicked into NeuroEdge's live stream, a glossy, overproduced town hall filled with corporate platitudes and artificial excitement. Julian stood at a podium, flanked by the exec team in pastel blazers and strategic smiles. Today, he said, we launch AthenaCore, the next chapter of medical innovation, developed entirely by our in-house team. Emily leaned back, coffee in hand. He didn't mention her name once. Not her 22 years of work. Her weekends sacrificed. The hospital nights spent testing error boundaries on live data. Instead, Travis Lee, the 26-year-old developer Emily had trained, was brought forward as the new face of innovation. Julian beamed. Travis led the final optimization layers. His work reflects the future of NeuroEdge. Travis, too young to understand the weight of stolen credit, smiled sheepishly. Emily's expression didn't change, but her fingers typed a single message and sent it to a journalist contact. You'll want to see this. Check Bionova's newsroom at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Bionova's press release went live. Bionova Therapeutics acquires exclusive rights to AthenaCore framework, developed by Emily Carter, former lead architect at NeuroEdge. The response was instant. Industry Slack channels exploded. Reddit threads blew up. LinkedIn buzzed with disbelief. Wait, wasn't that NeuroEdge's core product? Emily built it? Why wasn't she in the livestream? Is NeuroEdge licensing tech they no longer own? By 10:45 a.m., Emily's inbox had turned into a storm. Requests for interviews, keynote invitations, venture capitalists offering partnerships. And by 11:30 a.m., Julian Marks finally realized the floor beneath him had cracked. An anonymous message popped up on Emily's phone. From Insider, former NeuroEdge colleague. Emergency meeting. Travis is panicking. Backend errors showing up on AthenaCore dev servers. Julian looks like he's about to pass out. Emily smiled, not out of cruelty, but clarity. The version of AthenaCore NeuroEdge was trying to launch? It didn't have the adaptive sequencing engine, the real logic core. That piece had never lived on company servers. It had lived in Emily's encrypted cloud space. registered to her personal IP license, entirely outside of NeuroEdge's legal reach. They had the car. She kept the keys. 1 p.m. NeuroEdge's internal systems began malfunctioning publicly. Their beta partners, 2 major hospitals, were experiencing logic failures during pilot runs. The system couldn't maintain data stability beyond 48 hours. They reached out to Julian, demanding answers. At 2:15 p.m., Rachel Kim, now sitting in a quiet boardroom across town, received a legal inquiry from NeuroEdge's attorneys. Subject: Athena Core licensing options. She simply forwarded it to Emily with one note. You want to answer this one? Emily drafted the reply herself. All licensing requests must adhere to the IP holder's terms. Non-negotiable clauses include attribution, press acknowledgement, and market exclusivity for 12 months. We are open to discussion, but not amnesia. By 3 p.m., Julian Marks was forced into a second emergency meeting with his executive board. This time, there were no confident grins or sleek presentations. Just panic. They had rolled out a product built on assumptions. They had launched a campaign on top of a framework they didn't own. Now they were bleeding credibility. Fast. 4:30 p.m. Back in her new office at BioNova, Emily received a final message from her insider. Travis is in tears. Julian just admitted to the board that you held the original logic system. People are stunned. Half the dev team is asking for transfers. Emily replied with just 2 words. Stay tuned. Because this wasn't over. Tomorrow, she would go on TechEdge Live, a national broadcast, to talk about IP ethics, the erasure of female engineers, and why attribution matters more than ever in an AI-driven world. NeuroEdge had tried to bury her story, but all they did was ignite it. The lights in the studio were warmer than Emily expected. She sat still as a production assistant adjusted her microphone, dusted her blazer collar, and gave her a final thumbs up. Across the table sat Serena Vaughn, the award-winning journalist who had built a career interviewing Silicon Valley giants. But today, her eyes didn't hold the usual sharpness. Today, they held respect. We go live in 5, 4, 3. The screen blinked on across the nation. Welcome to TechEdge Live, Serena said, smiling toward the camera. Our guest today is someone whose name has shaken the foundation of biotech innovation this week. Emily Carter, architect of the Athena Core framework and now chief AI strategist at BioNova Therapeutics. Emily, thank you for being here. Emily nodded calmly. Thank you for having me. Serena leaned in slightly. Let's address the obvious. The industry believed NeuroEdge had built Athena Core. Until 3 days ago. Now we know that the technology, and the mind behind it, belong to you. What happened? Emily didn't flinch. For 22 years, I built systems behind closed doors. She began. I never cared about stage lights. I cared about what worked. But somewhere along the way, being quiet started to mean being invisible. Serena blinked. You're saying they erased you? I'm saying, Emily said slowly, they assumed I wouldn't speak. The room went quiet. Over the next 28 minutes, Emily laid it out, not with fury, not with vengeance, but with clarity. She spoke of patents, of timestamps, of late nights spent in server rooms debugging recursive loops. She explained the difference between contribution and ownership, and how attribution wasn't a luxury, it was a right. They didn't just fire me, she said at one point, her voice firm. They tried to rewrite history, but I kept receipts. When the interview ended, Serena didn't rush to wrap up. Instead, she looked across the desk and said softly, "You're the story so many engineers have lived in silence." Emily met her eyes. Then it's time to make sure they don't have to anymore. 30 minutes after the broadcast, Emily's name was trending on every platform, not just LinkedIn and X but across national news tickers. Major outlets picked up the clip. Commentators called her the voice of a silenced generation. At BioNova HQ, the energy was electric. Rachel Kim stood at the center of the analytics war room. "We've got 3 major hospitals requesting demo calls within the hour." 3, she said, half laughing, half shocked. "Emily, your segment hit harder than any PR rollout I've ever seen." But Emily didn't celebrate yet, because the messages had already started to come in, from engineers, developers, scientists, even college students. "You gave us permission to speak. I documented every line of code today because of your story. They said I wasn't essential. But your story reminded me, they can't scale without us." That was the shift. She had started this battle because of a lie. She was continuing it for the thousands who had lived that same lie in silence. Meanwhile, over at NeuroEdge, Julian Marks was unraveling. By 3 p.m., the boardroom looked like a war zone. Screens displayed error logs, red financial dashboards, and live-streamed segments of Emily's interview playing on loop. Stock analysts were asking questions Julian didn't have answers for. Why had the company claimed full ownership of Athena Core when the core engine wasn't even registered under their IP? Why had they failed to disclose the original inventor's departure? Had NeuroEdge misled investors? He tried to spin it. This is a PR storm. We'll weather it. But even he didn't believe it anymore. An emergency board vote was called for the next morning. That night, Emily stood by her office window. The city stretched out below, glittering like a system diagram. In the distance, she could see the roof of the NeuroEdge Tower, once her second home. Now a cautionary monument. She thought of all the years she'd questioned herself. The rooms she was asked to stay quiet in. The credit she was told she didn't need. The files she saved. The messages she archived. The days she doubted. And then she thought of one moment. The look on Travis's face during the livestream when the system began to fail. Confused. Lost. Like a child asked to pilot a ship he had never studied. She didn't hate him. She pitied him. He wasn't the villain. He was the symptom of a system that believed shiny confidence was more valuable than quiet brilliance. The next morning, NeuroEdge issued a vague public statement. We are reviewing recent developments regarding our product pipeline and intellectual property alignment. At BioNova, Emily sat down with the legal team to finalize a licensing model, airtight, aggressive, and crystal clear. The final clause? Public attribution required in all commercial use and promotional materials. Failure to comply will result in immediate revocation of license. Rachel grinned when she read it. You want a nameplate on the front door? No, Emily said, signing the page. I want to make sure no one ever loses their name again. 2 weeks had passed since Emily Carter stepped out of the shadows and into the spotlight. Since then, BioNova had become the hottest name in tech and biotech circles alike. Investors flocked. Medical institutions requested integration trials. Even skeptical voices in the AI space had begun shifting their tone. Why? Because the person behind the technology was no longer a mystery, and more importantly, no longer silent. Emily stood at the whiteboard in BioNova's newly launched AI division, a sun-drenched corner of the building now dubbed the Athena Lab. The name wasn't Rachel's idea. It wasn't marketing. It was the engineers who named it that. Because to them, this wasn't just another office. It was the origin point of something different. Around her sat 6 engineers, some from her old NeuroEdge team. Others poached from companies that had made the same mistake Julian had, underestimating the builders. These weren't flashy people. They weren't the ones you saw on conference banners. They were the ones who got things done. Emily pointed to a set of diagrams outlining the next evolution of Athena Core. This isn't just about replicating the model, she said. It's about letting it adapt, organically, across systems and industries. One of the engineers, Elena, leaned forward. So, not just diagnostics? But logistics? Climate models? Even autonomous policy design? Emily smiled. Exactly. The framework is flexible. The only limit is the intention behind the code. There was a pause, a shift in energy. For the first time in many of their careers, these minds, often relegated to quiet cubicles, were being asked not just to build, but to lead. Later that day, Emily met with Rachel Kim in a glass-walled strategy room. The city shimmered behind them, a living map of possibilities. You sure about this? Rachel asked, tapping the proposal on the table. It was bold, revolutionary, dangerous. Emily was proposing open access modules of Athena Core, the foundational engine, made available for public educational use under a controlled license. It would allow universities, independent researchers, and even small startups to experiment, test, and improve their own models without having to go through corporate red tape. You could monetize every single line of code. Rachel added, instead, you want to share it? I don't want to hoard power. Emily said, I want to decentralize it. Build a new culture around it. One where people like me don't have to wait 2 decades to be acknowledged. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, let's do it, but only if we make the launch public. I want the world to see who's leading this. 1 week later, in a sleek digital event that drew over 500,000 live viewers, Emily Carter stepped onto a minimalist stage beneath the banner ATHENACORE Open Access Initiative. Technology designed to lift everyone, not just the ones in the boardroom. She spoke briefly, directly, passionately. This isn't just code, she said. It's the blueprint of a better future, one where innovation doesn't require permission. And creators aren't erased by executives with better suits. The moment was electric. She wasn't launching a product. She was launching a movement. Emails began flooding in from researchers across the country. Community colleges in underserved areas requesting API access. Women in STEM programs asking for partnerships. A team of teenage coders from Detroit posted a TikTok recreating a simplified version of Athena's analysis engine. It went viral in 36 hours. And amid the attention came something else. Respect. Not forced, not performative, but earned, the way Emily had always lived. Meanwhile, at NeuroEdge, the internal collapse accelerated. 3 more senior engineers resigned. 2 enterprise clients broke contracts. And the board, in quiet desperation, finally reached out to BioNova with an olive branch, full licensing at the premium rate. Complete attribution included. Emily approved it, not out of revenge, out of proof that the future she was building had room for those who had once betrayed her, so long as they came with humility and a checkbook. One evening, as the sun melted behind the Pacific, Emily returned to the Athena lab after hours. The lights were dimmed, the office quiet, but not cold. On her desk sat a letter. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper. It read, "I watched your launch today. I see now what I refused to see before. You weren't just essential, you were everything. If I could go back, I'd listen, I'd follow, not lead. Thank you for building something better. Travis." Emily stared at the signature for a moment. Then she set the letter down. She didn't feel anger. She felt something new. Grace. What she had built was no longer hers alone. It was becoming a legacy, one written in collaboration, in truth, and in visibility. Because for the first time, Emily Carter wasn't the architect behind the curtain. She was the name on the building. And no one would ever take that away again. A month had passed since the Athena Core Open Access Initiative went live. And the ripple effect was turning into a wave. Universities were integrating it into curriculum. Nonprofits were using it to model data on healthcare equity. And in a surprise twist, even a government research lab requested a consultation with BioNova to explore using Athena Core in environmental prediction models. And at the center of it all, quietly commanding the storm, was Emily Carter. No longer in the shadows. No longer the invisible hand behind powerful systems. Emily had become something else entirely. A symbol. It wasn't just that she'd built something remarkable. It was how she'd done it, with integrity, documentation, and relentless commitment, even in the face of betrayal. That morning, she walked into the Athena lab to find something unusual. The whiteboard was full, but not with code. Instead, there were names, dozens of them, students, interns, first-time engineers, each one listed under a banner written in bold. The builders of tomorrow. Next to each name was a short note. First in her family to code. Rejected by 4 firms. Accepted here. Started with a public Athena license. Emily blinked. Overcome. Elena, one of her most trusted engineers, stepped beside her. "We thought you should see how far your story's gone." Elena said, "You didn't just build Athena Core. Emily, you built a door, and a whole lot of us walked through it." Emily swallowed hard. It was the first time in her career she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. She was simply seen. Later that day, she hosted a mentorship circle, a bi-weekly session she'd initiated with BioNova's newest hires. It wasn't mandatory. It wasn't formal. It was a room with beanbags, whiteboards, coffee, and the raw kind of honesty that rarely exists in corporate spaces. Today's topic: owning your work without apology. A young developer, Alexis, raised her hand. How do you know when to speak up? Especially when you're new and everyone's louder than you? Emily smiled gently. If they're louder, let them be loud, but make sure your work is so solid, so traceable, that when the truth surfaces, and it always does, there's no doubt where it came from. She paused. And document everything, she added with a grin. Even the drafts. Laughter filled the room, not because she was funny, but because she was trusted. By week's end, Emily had been invited to speak at 3 major summits: the Global Code Equity Forum, the Women in Deep Tech Roundtable, and most surprisingly, a closed session with the Federal Innovation Ethics Board. The same agency that once deemed her work too specialized for policy was now offering her a seat at the table to define the future of AI attribution law. She accepted, but not out of ego. Out of obligation. Because for every Emily Carter who found a way forward, there were 1,000 more being silenced, erased, or folded into footnotes. That had to end, and she now had the voice, the title, and the platform to end it. That night, alone in her office with the city glowing below, Emily opened a file labeled Legacy Notes. Inside were thoughts she'd written over the years, notes never meant to be read. Just reflections, pain, pride, pieces of a journey too complicated to explain at the time. But now, rereading them, she smiled. One line stood out. I don't want revenge, I want permanence. And she had found it, not through fire or fury, but through evidence, purpose, and leadership. She wasn't just an architect of code anymore. She was building something bigger, a culture, a future, a world where quiet didn't mean erased. And that was everything. A single spotlight bathed the stage in warm gold as Emily Carter stepped up to the podium. The room was packed, CEOs, engineers, students, journalists, people from across the world had flown in for the Women in Technology Global Leadership Summit. This was the closing keynote, the slot once reserved only for industry legends. The one Emily had watched from live streams for years, always from the background. Now, she was the headliner. The applause began the moment her name appeared on the screen. Emily Carter, creator of Athena Core, chief AI strategist. BioNova Therapeutics. She waited for the clapping to fade, then spoke, steady, clear, composed. 1 year ago today, she began. I was escorted out of a building I helped build. The silence was immediate, not because I failed, she continued, but because I had quietly succeeded for too long. She let it hang in the air. I didn't lead pitch meetings. I didn't walk red carpets. I didn't post every milestone online. I just built, day after day, because I believed in the work. But in an industry obsessed with visibility, quiet builders get erased. That's what they tried to do to me. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. A few heads nodded, eyes wide. But here's what they didn't understand. She said, you can fire a person, but you cannot erase what they've created. Applause erupted. Emily smiled, just slightly. She walked the audience through her journey, the startup years, the overlooked contributions, the betrayal that was meant to end her, and the resurrection that followed. But it wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of recognition, ownership, and designing your future before someone else writes it for you. And when she described her open access initiative and the global wave of builders rising behind it, the crowd leaned forward, not just to hear, but to believe. Innovation is never just the product, she said. It's the process, it's the people, it's the forgotten architect, it's the intern who optimized the algorithm after midnight. It's the woman who documented everything just in case someone tried to claim it wasn't hers. Pause. I was that woman. The standing ovation was instant. Long, loud, earned. After the keynote, dozens of attendees waited in line to shake her hand. Some cried, some whispered thank yous, some just stood there, silent, eyes wide with admiration. But one moment froze her. A young woman, maybe 25, glasses slightly crooked, held a notebook close to her chest. When she finally reached Emily, her voice trembled. They always told people like me to just be thankful for a seat in the room, she said, but watching you, I realized something. Emily tilted her head. What's that? The woman's eyes welled up. We can build the room. Emily reached out. Steady. Yes, she said, we always could. That night, in her office high above the San Diego skyline, Emily Carter stood alone, watching the city lights flicker like data pulses. On her desk sat a single envelope, no label, no return address. Inside, a letter, handwritten, from Julian Marks. Emily, there's no version of this where I look good. I lost sight of what mattered. I was threatened by what I didn't understand, by someone who didn't play by the same rules I did. I tried to take your work without giving you your name. Now, I see that your name was the work. I lost everything. You gained what we never gave you, ownership. I hope one day, when they study Athena Core in textbooks, they know it started with you. Julian. Emily folded the letter once, placed it in a drawer, not out of anger, but out of understanding. He was right. They had tried to erase her. But now, her name wasn't just in the footnotes, it was on legal patents, digital frameworks, educational portals, and etched into the history of ethical AI innovation. She didn't scream, she built. And now the world couldn't stop listening. The story of Emily Carter is not just a tale of justice, it's a reminder of what happens when the quiet genius refuses to stay quiet. For too long, industries have celebrated charisma over competence, polish over perseverance, and visibility over value. Emily's journey teaches us that integrity, documentation, and unshakable self-worth are the most powerful weapons against erasure. You don't need to scream to be heard, but you do need to prepare. Record your contributions, stand by your code, trust your work even when others ignore it. Because when the time comes, the truth doesn't need permission to speak, it only needs proof. Emily didn't win through revenge. She won by knowing her worth, owning her voice, and refusing to let others profit off her silence. That's not just a lesson in tech. That's a lesson in life. If you're an engineer, designer, artist, or builder of any kind, start documenting your work today. Keep a version control system. Timestamp your code. Write notes on your designs. Don't rely on memory or company loyalty alone. Make your contributions traceable, not just for credit, but for protection. Speak up when you're sidelined. Mentor others who feel invisible. Build networks outside your company walls. And most importantly, remember, your mind is your greatest asset. No employer, no title, and no manager can take that from you, unless you let them. Be like Emily, quiet when necessary, unstoppable when it counts. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.